In the wake of his conquest of the holy city of Sancrator, a chilling quiet falls across the lands of King Mannimarco. But it was not the quiet of peace, but the silence of absolute damnation. His enemies were crushed, their lands absorbed, and their people now the subject of a dark new power. For the King of Worms, victory was not a time for rest, but for the grim and necessary work of solidifying his rule. And this process will be measured by acts of unspeakable cruelty in pursuit of his ambitions. And the first order of business will be to settle the debts of the vanquished. And we now reside in his own throne room, looking in the desecrated hearts of Sancrator. And before him is his prisoner, the Duchess Beatrix, the former ruler of the city, a giant woman, a lowborn who had risen to power through strength, but she is now broken, her city lost and now captive. And Mannimarco would speak with his usual arrogance. The ransom for your life was set. You have failed to pay it. I am a being of my word, Duchess, and the time for payment has passed. And the Duchess would speak with a choked whisper while she is in chains. Please, my king, I have nothing left but my life. My treasury is empty. Please spare me. You are correct, says Mannimarco. You have nothing left to offer me. But your life still has utility. You could not afford to buy your freedom, so I shall claim your service, and you will be a useful fighter for my cause. And the Duchess could only thrash and scream in horror as Mannimarco's thralls dragged her forward, and what followed would not be a simple execution, but a horrific act of uncreation. Mannimarco would conduct a ritual, his hands glowing with a necrotic light, as he drew her soul from her body and reshape it into something ethereal, eternal, and something that would serve him forever. And the woman would scream as her life was cut short, and her skin would turn pale, her eyes glow blue, and she would rise not as the woman that she was, but an intelligent thrall who was now bound to the Worm King for all eternity. And Mannimarco would gasp at Duke Vittel. I guess he did not want his wife back. Well, she will be 9 now, you see. You are still stuck with her as a spouse, even though she is undead. So you won't be able to get remarried unless you divorce her. Yes, a master stroke, is it not? Now get out of my sight. And the debts of the old rulers would be repaid in blood and undeath, and he would turn his mind to grander projects. And as luck would have it, he had control of a holy site, and he would begin sowing his legend. And it would be an insidious quest to establish himself as the custodian of a holy site. It would be a subtle background task that would have great long-term benefits for his own divinity. And Sancrator will begin to be transformed, slowly, effortlessly, and it would burn. Its presence of divinity would turn into darkness. But of course, even as he would lay the foundations, there would be betrayal festering within his court, and threats would begin to rise from once loyal hands. And as Mannimarco would review the reports from his spy master, he would come across details of a plot against his consort Morna, and the name of the conspirator would make him pause. It was Mare Duella, the warrior who he had granted lordship of the Dragon Fields. She had been rewarded for her service, given land and power, but she had grown a little bit above her own riches and station, as she would be plotting the woman who now stood beside the king. And Mannimarco would find this very grieving. This is unacceptable. It would not be an act of simple treason, but profound idiocy, and it would be a failure to see what is right. And Mannimarco would later summon the mayor to his throne room, and the weight of the summonings would settle in the chamber like a shroud, and the mayor would approach before the throne, a defiant and proud warrior to the last. "You have summoned me, my king," she says. "I did. I gave you land, and I raised you up from a common warrior to a noble, and in return you plot against my consort. You plot against me." No, wait, my king, you misunderstand. She is a poison in your ear, a rat who poos in your food. I did it for you. Ha! 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 Do you really believe that you know what's best for me? You have betrayed my trust, so I shall strip you of the one thing you cannot live without, your sense of self. And you will serve me once more, Maris de Wheeler, but this time you will do so without your flesh. And Mannimarco once again would unleash his dark arts and unmake her slowly and agonizing, as his tendrils would erupt and hold her in place, and he would begin his incantation and strip her humanity away. For he did not just kill her, he unmade her. He ripped the very flesh from her body and cast it away as a husk, and her screams would echo through the hall for many days, and it would be a symphony of terror that would serve as a warning to any who would dare defy him. And she would no longer be human, but a skeletal horror, her will erased, and her soul trapped in a prison. As a mindless soldier, it is a ever-growing army. And these displays of brutality would send terror through his court. But fear, as Mannimarco knew, was a double-edged sword, and it could inspire obedience or inspire rebellion. And in the shadows, the Liberty faction would form, and it would be a collection of terrified vassals who would seek to disrupt his reign from within. But Mannimarco would not meet this threat with another purge, for that was inefficient, and instead would leverage the acts of secrets and lies as a more effective means of curtailing internal chaos. And Mannimarco would say, "A woman who thinks she can casually start a faction against me? Unacceptable. It is simply unacceptable. And it would be much easier to ensnare her in my web." Mannimarco would not need to add to his body count. With a few well-placed secrets and hooks, he would dismantle rebellions before they could even begin, and would trap the conspirators in their own web of secrets, leaving them powerless to act against him. And it would be acts like these that would be simple. Jitsu ni elegento, an elegant solution for an easy issue. and his kingdom would be pacified through terror and intrigue, and the King of Worms would once again gaze outward. For Mannimarco, peace was merely the quiet before the storm of the war in the next, and the kingdom of Bruma, looking right, would be next for his calculating mind. And of course, the master of the Order of the Black Worm was a being of profound patience. Yet the tedious, piecemeal nature of mortal conquest would grate against his eternal sensibilities. For the act of leveraging his holy war would be taking one county, waiting, taking another county, taking another duchy, to slay one king, to see a son rise in his place. It was inefficient, repetitive, and deeply boring. And in the quiet of his desecrated halls, his mind, of course, with profound genius, would work on an eleganto solution. Yes, Jitsu ni, truly eleganto, an infinitely more wicked solution. And in his private study, he would pore over the genealogies of the surrounding kingdoms, look at the maps of Bruma, the Heartlands, the Anvil to the south. They would be spread across his table, and Morna would observe, her expression of unwavering curiosity, and she would speak to him. "You have been studying these lineages for days, my king. Your mind is elsewhere, far from the current conquest of the imperial city. What is it that you seek in these scrolls?" And Mannimarco would look up with a slow, predatory smile, and would appear as if a serpent who had discovered a new kind of venom. "My dear, I seek efficiency. Why would I waste decades chipping away at kingdoms piece by piece, when I could simply take the entire board in a single move?" And it was here that he would spawn a magnificent and grueling idea. And this plan would be profound, and it would be an act of cruelty that the likes of Mannimarco could only hope to conceive. For he would not just conquer Bruma, but he would steal the very soul of it as well. And he would point to a name on a scroll: the Prince Holmar of Bruma. A young man, heir to the throne. Imagine, Morna, if this boy were to be captured. Imagine if he were to be remade, turned into one of my thralls, an undead lich bound completely to my will. He would still be his father's heir and would still possess a legitimate claim to the entire kingdom of Bruma. And as Morna listens, her eyes would widen, would gasp at the sheer evil of the plan. "You would press his claim?" "Precisely," Mannimarco replies. "I would raise my armies, declare war in his name, and install him on the throne. The world would see a civil war and a son claiming his birthright, but I would see one of my own placed at the head of an entire kingdom, and that kingdom would be mine to command, and in its entirety through him. It is perfect." And Mannimarco, of course, in his arrogance, would be taken with this brilliance, and would not consult any of his legal counselors to the finer points of the various laws, for he was an opportunist, and this opportunity was too tempting to ignore. He would jump at the first chance. For a being who thought in terms of centuries, securing this asset now would be a logical step. And he would launch a brutal raid, of course, and Mannimarco's forces in the night would capture the young prince, and he would be spirited away simply before even the alarm could be raised. And as he took the son to a quiet place, It would have world-altering consequences. The prince will be brought into Mannimarco's dungeons, not to be tortured or ransomed, oh no, but for a more dark, dreaded purpose. And what would be followed would be the utter unmaking of him. He will be stripped of his life and reforged into a being of his own undeath. And this prison would be the culmination of the young prince's final moments. He did not scream. He did not feel any pain, but was released in the cold grasp of death. And Mannimarco would think to himself, seeing the triumphantness of his own creation, this moment is truly insanity. The prung prince, Homar, has been made into a baby lich, and the key to this kingdom was mine. And the ritual would be successful, for Prince Homar would be now a young, magically gifted lich, with his will bound to Mannimarco and his mind clean. Mannimarco had his puppet, and he would begin to mold his creation for its future role. And he would look and study the young lich. With his eyes of faint blue, he would assess his creation. He still has his magical affinity, excellent, but he will need to learn the art of war. He will need to learn how to combat and strategize. I will take charge of this one's education. Bring me my marshal. You will train him to be a commander, and we will remake his lineage and change his culture. And once this creature steps back into Bruma, they will not welcome him and will make him all the more dependent on me. It would be at these apex, as he would admire his new weapon, that a wizened counselor would eventually step forward and offer decisive consultation. It is a brilliant move, my king, but there is a complication that a matter of imperial law that I think you will need to realize. Explain yourself, counselor. Your Majesty, you are a king, and if you were to press the prince's claim, he would become king of Bruma. But as a king, he would not be your vassal. He would be your equal and therefore an independent ruler. And of course, there would be steps to this entire process. Mannimarco's strategy would only work if he held a title superior to that of his puppet. And with this, he could not jump the gun on his immediate plans. Ah, yes, of course. I can't just jump the gun now, but at least I have Homar in my clutches. I need an Empire tier title if I'm going to make this plan come to fruition. And his ambition would be born, and the conquest of Bruma would be a later step. And his overarching pursuit must be to forge an empire. He will look at his war council and will see the map and speak to his counselors. So let us see what we would take. Shall I create the Empire of Hammerfell or delve into the Colovian estates? For Hammerfell, my king, you would need to control 107 counties, a monumental undertaking. The Colovian estates may be closer, but it would still be a formidable challenge. Then this is what we shall do. My ambition will not be checked, and we will pursue the building of Hammerfell, but the Imperial City must come first. The timeline along my plans will not be delayed, and it will suffer no pauses. And Mannimarco would redirect his attention once again to the Imperial City with his new Lich Prince and his long-term plans set in motion. He would plan for ages, and Mannimarco would have immense foresight and boundless cruelty. And these grand designs would gestate in the shadows as he focused on his present war, his goal, the Heartlands, and the key being the Imperial City to limitless power. And through this meticulous crafting of his empire, this immediate conquest, the walls of the Imperial City would await the wrath of his doom. And the time for subtlety was over, and the age of conquest would reach its violent conclusion. And the Lich Lord Mannimarco, with his kingdom of undeath, would stand at the gates of the Heartlands, with his ambition focused on a singular aim at the heart of the world. He had played the long game long enough, and would set in motion his gambit and launch a plan that would eventually deliver a kingdom at his doorstep. But of course, that project would be a plan for the future, and now his present demanded a direct application of his power, and his gaze would be fixed on the Imperial City. And as Mannimarco stood in his war chamber, he would stand before the grand map, and his generals, his consort, would be in attendance, and the full might of his kingdom would be mustered. For Mannimarco's army was a thing of nightmare and legend, and his mortals would be bustered by the thousands of his undead thralls. He could even summon thousands more if he needed, and at full strength his legions numbered in the thousands, above 10,000 men, living and dead, and that force would be of such overwhelming might that a kingdom could not hope to stand against it. And with this army at his back, he would declare the war. "We are done!" shouts Mannimarco with a resonant boom. "We are done chipping away at the edges of the world, and I want the Imperial City, and I will declare the war." And his declaration would send shockwaves across Tamriel, and the Empress Regent, a ruler of a crumbling empire, could only muster a fraction of Mannimarco's strength. And the war for the city would be like a fighting for a fortress, its walls strong, and it was a bastion that stood for 1,000 years. And Mannimarco would press his siege on this land, and it would be long and arduous. Of course, Mannimarco would initially start attempting to slow siege up his way to the capital itself, but later would find that this would cause a stalemate and a war of attrition, for if it conceded for too long, he would simply lose the war from not taking the goal itself, and this act would test his patience. "This war is taking too long," says Mannimarco, "and my legions are bleeding themselves dry against this very stone." And he would of course move towards the capital itself, but it would take a staggering amount of months, even years, just to bring it down. But of course, in these moments, a genius would arise, and Mannimarco, of course, the dark energies that would begin to coalesce around him, he would stride out into the battlefield, his presence silencing the din of war. He remembered the power that he himself possessed, and he would not wait for siege engines to do what he could do himself. And he would take a deep breath and focus his power and make a shout of doom that would send a wave of sonic force across the battlefield. Foos! It would hit the walls, and of course the stones stood for an age. They were grown and cracked, but they did not fall. And even with his immense power, the ancient magic that protected the city, his shout would not be strong enough. It would impact it, but not brutally bring down the walls. And profoundly enough, these events would cause a grander scene to erupt within his own faith. And while he was waging this war, his piety would rise among his followers, and it would reach legendary levels. He was laying siege to the holiest location of them all and on the path of claiming a third holy site. He would be a religious icon among the masses of his cult. He would be that much closer to becoming that of a god. And recognizing this, he would consecrate his faith. And consecrate the bloodline and cement his dynasty forever. And it would be a grand ritual. And he would pour a fortune into the piety of the act. And this seed would plant him more lineage and allow a blessing to pass through his generations. I am the Savior. Mannimarco would be known as the savior of the worm cult. And this act would grant him and his dynasty plenty of renown and legacy. And he would be a holy figure, very well chosen to be a deity of worship. But of course, back on the battlefield, he would still not be very patient as the walls waned, because they stood, and he would be tired of waiting still. And the shout was not enough. He says, "Then I will unmake the very stone myself." Mannimarco, of course immortal, was still for some reason unnecessarily impatient at times like war. For he would now begin to start crafting a spell of immense destructive power that would crystallize the entire air around him. And he would conjure something that could hopefully end the Imperial City's defenses. And of course, he would chant and eventually gather a vortex of energy in his hands. And he would direct this magical beam at the walls. An ancient stone would not crumble but dissolve and turn into a black sand that scattered in the wind. And the walls of the city would eventually fall, and Mannimarco's legions would pour through the breach, and his will and his army would flood the streets. And Mannimarco would stand in the throne room of the white gold tower and see the ruby throne. His eyes would glow with the light of 1,000 souls itself, and the heartlands would be his to claim. And it would be utter victory. The city had fallen, and the heartlands were his. He will be a new monster on this world, the undisputed master of Tamriel. And he would stand silent and feel the immense, untapped power of the tower singing to him. For now, the promise of a limitless army could now be raised. And the age of mortals would end, and the age of the worm would begin.